Dopamine swipe, dopamine swipe. Followers likes, double tap. Now they control your life, Dopamine swipe.
What is up? Welcome back to the 817 podcast. Tony, how was Big Bend?
Man, Big Bend is Big Bend. It's awesome. It's beautiful. It's lovely. Everyone should go. It's next to Fort Worth, Texas. It's probably my favorite place on earth.
Yeah. Honestly, like Texas, Big Bend, it's such a gem. If you can get there, make it happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I think everybody needs to make it a priority. It was like, for me, even as a lifelong Texan, it was like one of those things that once I did it, I was like, oh man, like now you're Texan, now you're feeling it. But yeah, it gives new meaning to the stars at night being big and bright deep in the heart of Texas. It's beautiful. Everyone should visit. And visit before it blows up even more than it already has. It's super busy.
Especially with spring break. Was it, you feel like the spring break impact?
Yeah, there was some definite spring break impact, which was a bummer because it is a great place to go and kind of feel like you're off the grid. So that sucked, but I'm glad more people are getting to see it, right? There's always that pro-con, that balance of things in the world. So it was good to see it. I'm glad a lot of people are getting to see it, but I hope that they stop seeing it as often in the years to come so that when I visit there with my family again, I think it would be nice to kind of go back to the old school, kind of quiet area that it is.
That's the problem with growth. That's the problem with like this whole podcast is about how do we make Fort Worth a great city, but a part of being here before everyone else is like that's the best part.
It's a trade-off. And my word of the year, my word of 2021 is balance. So I'm very committed to that idea of like, well, what does the balance look like for Fort Worth as we grow and scale, but also as we keep our charm and hold on to the things that make us who we are.
Yeah. Well, guys, it is Monday. And not only is it that every Monday we do a show for Fort Worth about politics, culture, trends that are going on in Fort Worth, Texas. But hey, guys, also this Monday, everyone is available for a vaccine. So let's make that happen. So if you guys aren't aware, everyone age 16 and older, regardless of occupation or health status, will be eligible for the COVID-19 vaccine starting today. So that is super exciting. And there's a lot of partnerships. You can get it at your local Albertsons, Kroger, grocery store, CVS, Walgreens. They're making it happen. Also, there's been a ton of drives. I don't know if you had a drive in your neighborhood. We had like a Meadowbrook kind of setup where people were coming to get the first vaccine. And so people were out here like showing us like where things are happening. And so this is awesome.
Yeah, it's awesome. I'm really excited about it. I hope that people are taking advantage of it, getting themselves signed up. I know that you and I talked about, before we started recording, that you and I are registered and we're ready to get out there and do the dang thing. It's exciting. We're taking the right steps. We're taking quick steps, but they feel like they're intentional. I just hope they get into folks' arms.
Yeah, and we're currently just kind of, if you're listening to this on Monday, we passed 10 million vaccines, which includes first dose and second dose. We're currently looking at the tracker today, 3.2 million people with the second dose and 6.8 million with the first dose. Now, I'm excited. Your schedule now. I know both of us having wives that are health professionals made this easy for us, but I'm going in to get my first shot Wednesday, which is exciting because I also have a presentation at a school in school on I guess Wednesday. On Friday, I have a speech in Muskogee, Oklahoma. So it's kind of perfect timing for me. It's gonna be like my first back to school presentation.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, I'm ready to have it, just to kind of give, not even for myself. I mean, obviously, there's like that selfish need of like, okay, like I want to feel better about what's going on. But, seeing my parents, seeing my grandparents, my mom lives with my grandmother, all of those things, I'm just kind of ready to have that peace of mind and that ease of, just that peace of mind. Like I said, I guess that's what I'm looking forward to.
Yeah, and I'm looking at it here, also it's like, the authorities have said we've hit a total of 250,000 COVID-19 cases in Tarrant County, which has included 3,265 deaths and estimated 241,234 recoveries. It just feels like we're at the finish line here in Fort Worth. And I mean, it was a grind. I mean, I definitely got the COVID blues being stuck at home, but I mean, it's like just being able to get back out there. It's going to be It's going to be good. Just to start. I mean, I even seen concerts starting to reschedule. So concerts like Kronbin is having a concert out in Austin. Nice. Alicia Keys. I know we're both Alicia Keys. Best concert I've ever been to. No cap. No judge. But it's that's scheduled in September. So things are coming back. Yeah. So I'm ready for it. Being people.
Ready to get out there, see some new people, new faces. I always realize anytime I'm out in public for longer than like 15 minutes, how I'm like just not versed at talking to people that I don't see regularly, like you or my wife, or that would probably conclude that list. Where I'm just like, man, I remember I used to make friends. I used to be good at this.
Yeah, no, and it's just crazy how I think a lot of what's happening too is like, what's the habits are going to be once people get out, like. I think some people have become so comfortable of a COVID lifestyle, like this idea of being comfortable, because statistically, once you have the vaccine, once you're there, the data that played to keep you in the house, it's going to be like the data is now going to show that it's okay to not be in your house. Right. And I don't know, like, I know Biden was July 4th, but it just seems like it's much closer to, Memorial Day. Is that right? Memorial Day? That one's in May? Or is it Labor Day? I always get that one mixed up. It's Memorial Day.
Memorial Day.
Yeah, Labor Day, September. Yeah. So, like, I feel like it's like that weekend. I mean, we're talking, that's like a whole month up.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like you, I'm very curious to see, what life is like post-COVID. I don't want to call it going back to normal. I want to see, what does change? What's here to stay? What are the impacts, not only nationwide and around the world, but specifically here in the Dallas-Fort Worth region, and not to, be overly optimistic. I think it is important to remember though, like, man, think about all the businesses that are gone, the people that were displaced, the folks who, this changed their lives in a not so beautiful way, the folks who lost family members. Those are going to have long-term impacts as well. So I don't want to be, crass and only think about this from a, where does the world go from here? Economics, data perspectives, like what do we do with all of the information that we gathered? I also want to be mindful of the fact that this had really serious implications on people. So yeah, we'll see what happens, but promising statistic in that Star Telegram. I think it was an Associated Press article that read it, but 45% of folks ages 65 and older are fully vaccinated. So reading that story of, older people in America who are getting to see their grandparents for the very first time, or their grandchildren for the very first time, getting out of the house. That is exciting. That's what we're about. Right on. I'm excited.
Yeah, and I'm looking
excited about it.
Yeah, based off of this Texas Tribune article, health experts have said that between 70 and 90% of Texans must be vaccinated in order to reach herd immunity and stop the spread. So if you look at that, that's Texas has about 29 million residents. That's so nearly a quarter of whom are under 18. So I think about we're getting our oldest, most vulnerable population vaccinated. I think this next step is, what does this data look like getting our people under 18 a part of the process now too. Of the 3 vaccines available, only 2-dose Pfizer vaccine is available for age 16 and up. The others are manufactured by Moderna and Johnson & Johnson, which are available for 18 and up. And so you're also like, this is not just a Texas, like what does it look like for our youngest population as well. I mean, even Joe Biden has directed to make vaccines available to all adults by May 1st. So that still leaves the youngest groups who are under 18. But there's not like, I don't know how that looks like for kids and if that's going to impact schools. I don't know what you're hearing on the school side of things, but I'm interested to see now, how do we include the youth as well in the vaccination process? Right.
And including them in the vaccination process. And then also thinking about, one of our favorite words, EJ, innovation for next school year. Yeah. What is, let's innovate. Let's get creative. Let's give opportunities for students to be at home. And if that works better for the parent and works better for the child, and virtual learning was a win for them, let's allow that to continue to happen. Right. But I know that, later on, I know I'm going to talk a little bit more about this education space. So I'll save it for that.
Yeah. Well, let's go ahead and dive into, I think to me, the big story this week, and it's to me, it's more of a state level story, but it's the restrictions on Texas voting, and what Republicans are doing to really prevent people to just be able to vote easily. I mean, you're having a lot of this confrontation around how because of COVID, mail-in ballots became an accessible thing for all, and Republicans are trying to play as if this was a fraud election, which is just the furthest from the truth. And I think what's tough about it is you're having people like Ted Cruz who are creating these gatherings to create fear that legal immigrants and people who aren't even citizens are voting, when it's just not the case. And so if you look at what happened this week, Senate Bill 7 would make sweeping change to Texas voting by extending early voting hours, prohibiting drive-through voting, and requiring Texans to provide proof of disability to qualify for mail-in voting. So that hits a lot of different people, right? It marginalizes people with disabilities. Mm-hmm. It impacts people who can't go vote during the day, so they really relying on those early voting hours that extended to 10 p.m. in some places,
right?
And so you're seeing this happen in Georgia, and it just seems like Texas is following suit, with Texas having so much, the Republicans having so much of the power locally. It's I'm afraid this stuff is going to get through and really impact how elections looking further in Texas are going to look.
Yeah, reading the article in the Texas Tribune here, it was interesting that whoever wrote the article said, like, after hours of listening to mostly things speaking against this, they went ahead and approved it anyways. Yeah. Some of this is just, I think the thing that really bugs me about this, and reading the article, and that one of the candidates was like kind of pushed on, like, so why is this a good idea? And the answer was, well, because people get tired and we think that they would be better off if they just did it in their like normal quote working hours. And I'm like, that has got to be the dumbest response to that question of like, well, we just don't want people to be sleepy when they're working the polls. That's weird because restaurants operate constantly, gas stations, hospitals, you name it, right? Like places are open, and I don't hear that same argument being made for them. I only hear it being made for this because it sounds like more people who are, let's say, our service industry workers, people who have night shifts, people who need those extended hours to get out and vote are going to be the ones who, well, let's face it, they're mostly going to be low income, Black and brown people who need that kind of assurance, who need those kinds of things so they can get to the polls. And the argument that we got was, well, the poll workers might get sleepy, so we can't do that. What an awful, awful defense. I can't believe you're on record saying that.
Yeah, and what's other crazy about it too, though, is this idea of like allowing people just watch people who are volunteering to be poll workers and like watching them do their job, and like this idea of that intimidation, because all you're going to have is a bunch of like, you saw what happened in Arizona, and especially like what happened at the Capitol. Why on earth would I want anyone looking at me doing a job for the country and put my life in danger? Like, it's like, look at how easily we can be breached. Like, that's just, so it's just like this idea of, okay, if you're going to allow people to watch people count votes or whatever and work the polls, like, then you need to like really beef up security and protections for these people. Like, that's just, I don't know too much of how that's going to look, but it just, I saw that in there too. And I thought that was just kind of interesting. And let's just go like, what I can't stand, and this is to me like the self-awareness, is like Trump's own officials, Homeland Security, like a joint statement from the Elections Infrastructure Government Coordinating Council and the Election Infrastructure Sector Coordinating Executive Committee said November 3rd election was the most secure in American history. All right. Like, that's the part that's crazy. And not only does like Homeland Security says it, then like the godfather of conservatism, Mitch McConnell, comes out and he says it's safe. He's like, yo, this will damage our country. This is not being American, worrying about like doing this to our country. Like, right. And if Mitch McConnell is saying it, because that guy never says anything progressive. Like, you got to realize, like, okay, maybe I am getting a little out of touch by saying this was, like,
right.
We're spinning our wheels, and Trump has given the Republican Party the opportunity to suppress. And like what we talked about earlier, we were talking about the whole idea of like this is what, when you have to start playing defense, you're becoming taxis and Uber, right? Like you're the taxis and Uber is coming and you're trying to create all these lobbyist laws around airports to prevent Uber to showing up to the airport. But at the end of the day, the American people are changing. And I just think right now, this is like the real opportunity for Republicans is to stop fighting about this voting stuff and really start fighting about like, what does a modern Republican look like, right? Off mic, we were talking about the difference between a Blockbuster and a GM, right? Like Blockbuster didn't innovate, so they're no longer here. And I just think at this rate of like demand, that's changing for the American people. I don't like, even if people have Republican or more conservative views, it's not like they want to tell people because how the majority and how the people that are currently in office represent them. So it's like the Republican Party is either going to be Blockbuster or they're going to be GM, right? Who was able to adapt and come up with the times and still have a language that hits on their principles, but they're not over here crazy politicking about election fraud.
Yeah.
And impacting the fabric of what it just means to be American.
I think so. But I agree for the most part. I definitely do. But I also have to go back to that idea of like the more things change, the more they stay the same. And I wonder if this whole, like, I don't have to change. We won't adapt. We won't progress. We will continue to hold these values regardless of the fact if they are misproven or they are no longer popular. Will more people attach to it just because it's old and familiar, or will more people start to look around and say, no, we should go and do that, right? Like it's like how fashion kind of comes back every couple of decades, right? Where it's like, oh man, like remember when we all used to wear bell bottoms? That was dumb. And then you wait 20 years and everybody's wearing bell bottoms again. Yeah. I hope that is not the case for politics, but I have been wrong before.
You definitely are going to have, you definitely have the seesaw of like, right now the seesaw is like, wow, Republicans are crazy because you got the Cruz, Abbotts, Paxtons of the world who are just making it you look like wackadoos. Yeah. And then Trump came along, but then like there is the balance of scale, because look what happened in San Francisco and the state of California, where too much government and inappropriate spending is really impacting the economics of those cities. And a lot of people are moving out of California because of the impact of the infrastructure and the inflated budgets that, so there's a lot of like, of that kind of frustration, very different. Like Texas frustration is like, quit being old school, suppressive, Republicans. But in California, there's like this talk about like too much government, too much, it's hard to live in California. So it is a seesaw.
Yeah. No, what you're talking about is for our government officials, our elected officials to do all the things they promise us in their campaigns, which is, listen to each other, collaborate, make sacrifices and meet somewhere in the middle, right? Like working together. But unfortunately, I just continue to see it's just more divisive. It's just more, I'm standing on my side of the aisle, and my side of the aisle is what it is. And this is both sides. This is Democrat and Republican, where I'm just like, y'all need to stop. Like we hired you, we chose you, we voted for you to talk to one another, be sensible adults, and figure this out. And instead, what we're getting is shouting matches and Twitter storms. Come on, y'all, we're better than this.
Yeah, and I wonder, and I just wonder how this is going to play out in the local elections, because I mean, what's happening here is this is how, when you have to play defense and the defense is not allowing American people to simply vote. I mean, it's just, I don't care if you're like a Republican, like that's just wrong. Like, that's just like, like I believe in capitalism, I believe in some Republican views, but it's just like, when are you going to update your software and realize like, like the things you're screaming about just are not right. And and what's perfect is they're doing all this right at spring break. Everyone's getting, thinking about other things, and it's just flying under the radar.
Right.
And that's just like very disappointing. And what's happening in Georgia is just like, this is what's, to me personally, systemic racism. Like, it's like you're doing things to prevent the voices of other people who are trying to adapt. You're pitting in laws to try to stay relevant. You're literally taxis at an airport.
Yeah.
And that is a sad way to live.
and it's what my final point on this, and you can take it away from here, but my thing with it is, and this article in the Texas Tribune, it's Keith Ingram. He's the chief of elections at the Texas Secretary of State's office. His quote was, "I think after a certain period, people get tired and are more likely to have mistakes." If you read the remainder of the article, everyone, what you will notice is there is a lack of data to support his claim. So because some people think that we don't have, quote, experience of voting at night, this is a bad idea. What's a bad idea is putting things into law without any sort of data or evidence to support the fact that this is actually going to make elections any of the things that you want it to be: safer, more efficient, more effective, getting more voters to the polls, whatever. This is rooted in something that is not data driven. I'm not going to say it's rooted in hate. I'm not going to say it's rooted in any of that, but it sure is not rooted in any kind of scientific evidence. So that's my beef with it, among other things. But to your point, yeah, this is taxis and Uber.
Yeah. And so let's, now we're going to move into our guest today. So our guest today is actually a local city council candidate, Dr. Jared Williams. He's a native Texan raised in Southwest Fort Worth. Dr. Jared Williams has dedicated his life's work to learning, listening, and fighting alongside communities to ensure that opportunities reach more families across the district, city, and state. Dr. Williams was raised by working parents, both educators, in the district public schools, District 6, where he's running. And now, like, what's really powerful, he graduated from North Crowley High School. He went and earned his doctorate in environmental science and science education from the University of North Texas. So his takes on the electric grid debacle is actually really awesome. Guys, he's 31 years old, a male of color, full of energy, full of what I just think, like, this is like a massive, like, honor to have him in Fort Worth doing this fight, because I'm just really excited for his campaign. So let's give it up for Dr. Jared Williams.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. I'm super inspired by the work that y'all do. I think that, like, Fort Worth is an awesome place. And like shows like this help, like, to spotlight the culture here in Fort Worth and also to elevate it. So, hats off to y'all. My Fort Worth story is I was born in Southwest Fort Worth. I was raised by two educators. Both my parents taught here in District 6. My mom was a second grade teacher at Pointer Elementary, and she loved literacy. And I think the one thing she loved more than that was children. And so just grateful for the legacy she left here in the district. My dad, he was a high school teacher. He retired last May. And so he's living the good life of, retired after so many years of service. He taught at South Hills High School here in the district, and actually started his teaching career in Northside High School. And so, needless to say, like, I've been rooted in our community and in Southwest Fort Worth. Me personally, I graduated from North Crowley High School. And so I'm also not only Crowley Pride Unified, but Panther Pride, I would like to say is, deepest in my heart. And so, growing up in Southwest Fort Worth, my parents, really taught me the importance of, faith, both my parents being people of faith, my dad, a pastor here in the community. And they also taught me about, just how important, our faith is in a hope, right. And rooted in hope of, what is to come tomorrow. And so, my parents used to always teach me about just how important that faith is, and, being a good neighbor, being committed to, doing good in your neighborhood. And so, all children do with great parents like I had, I wanted to make them proud. And so, after finishing at North Crowley, I took a sabbatical or a hiatus away from Fort Worth and went to go play football at the Fort Valley State University in Georgia. It's a historically Black college and university. And, I went there and studied biotechnology, plant science. And it was there where I really, was able to, like, thrive on so many levels. And I'm grateful for, like, my HBCU experience. I came back after I graduated from there. My plans were to like go to another university, but my mom had got diagnosed with breast cancer, and so I made the tough and right decision to come back home, and it was just amazing. I remember coming back home, and on my way home, I picked up the phone and called this professor at TCU, Dr. Mike Slattery. I was like, "Hey, I want to enroll in your program," and this was like in June. He said, and at the end of our conversation, I'll do you one better. Would you like to come here on a full ride? And so I was like, absolutely. So I got the chance to come back home, go to school, be there with my family and my mother in such a pivotal moment in our lives. And, ever since I've been back, I've been really focused on not only my family, but also on something that I think is what inspires all of us. And that's to build, and leave a legacy in our communities, right? Building neighborhoods and building community. And I think we all have a role in that. And so for me, that work looked different, but it was always on that purpose of like really uplifting Fort Worth. And so I worked on many issues through my nonprofit leadership and as a science educator around the environment, around housing issues, around public education reform, and so many other things. And I'm grateful to be a Fort Worthian, but I'm also grateful to be able to, take this next step in service. And I think that this step, in running for city council in District 6 is really, for me, about a calling as a Fort Worthian that we're all called to. And that's this idea of how do we create a just and prosperous Fort Worth together. And so that's what I'm here for. That's my story. I love to dive deeper anywhere y'all like.
I want to get into, I guess, some of the politics first, and then I want to go back and learn a little bit more about you. So in the politics first, what are some of the biggest issues that you think are facing District 6 right now?
Yeah, I think for me, the reality is that we've left some neighborhoods behind in District 6. And I think that many of the issues that we face are intersecting in our ability to create like whole neighborhoods. And so for me, I look at, parts of my district, like near Wedgwood, Wedgwood East in particular. You see McCart and Alta Mesa, and you can just see how those two particular areas and communities in District 6 have completely changed. And I think that, we've seen an unbalanced approach in which District 6 is a sprawling district. We've seen that District 6 is starting to grow, and there's a lot of, great things happening on Chisholm Trail, but at the expense of our residents, off McCart and Alta Mesa, at the expense of our residents off of 35 and neighborhoods like Pointer Crossing, and even further south down towards Burleson. And so I think that when we talk about like, how do we build a just and prosperous city, I would argue that it's one brick at a time. And at the very root of that development is this idea that neighborhoods are the bricks. And so when we talk about what does it take for neighbors to be whole, we've talked with thousands of neighbors since July, and they say several things about, what makes their neighborhood strong. Things like strong jobs for families, things like supports for small businesses. We see things like improving neighborhood safety, right? Not just around like budgets, dollars and cents and where they're allocated, but around things like accountability, around transparency with our first response services and excellent services, ensuring that they're excellent. And then like when we talk about safety, even beyond that, our neighbors are talking about, well, my neighborhoods, the things that make me safe in my neighborhoods are sidewalks, lights in my neighborhoods, things like having infrastructure match our growth. Like we have lots of stretches of roads without lights and stop signs, and we've seen terrible consequences of growth that hasn't been done as intentionally and as smart as we'd like it to be. And then the last thing our neighbors talk about around neighborhoods is having a representation that reflects the diversity, the culture, the values, and also isn't afraid to go walk into the neighborhoods. And I run every day, so I run through a lot of the neighborhoods here in the district. And what we've learned is that representation absolutely matters. Mm-hmm. It matters on so many levels. It matters for the families who have faced incredible challenges in this year. That was 2020 and 2021, especially around the recent snowstorm. And so I think that we had to get back to the basics. I think that we can't put the cart before the horse. We really have to get back to focus on our neighborhoods. And if we leave neighborhoods behind, we'll continue to see the challenges we do. But I have hope. I have hope that when we get the basics right around neighborhoods, we won't just be the 13th largest city in Fort Worth. I would argue that we have all the opportunity in the world to be number one. And so that's a big issue for us, but I think we can tackle it.
So you mentioned the snowpocalypse and the ice storm kind of debacle there. What is like, as going on to your academic hat of being an environmentalist in a way, like what is your take that you could share with like average people like us that like give us a perspective of what you think went wrong, or what do you think needs to happen moving forward so something like that doesn't happen again?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, with my background in environmental science, one of the classical ideas that we talk about, especially through my dissertation work, is this idea called the stress nexus. And the stress nexus is the relationship between our water, energy, our food, our soil, et cetera. Right. And when we look at like snowpocalypse, we saw that our energy system failed. It failed on a number of reasons. One, because the state didn't have a fail-safe in connecting to the national grid. We also saw that our energy diversification at a city scale wasn't quite where it needed to be. So our energy source was solely dependent on the state's grid on so many levels. And so what we saw was when our energy system came to near full collapse, it affected our water system as well, right? Like we saw folks having to boil water who have only been in their homes, brand new homes in North Fort Worth for like months to weeks, right? And they were having to boil water and then their water got shut off. And so what we saw was that our city's water system was also connected to that energy system. And imagine what would it look like if the city had invested in energy, sustainable energy practices that would at least provide some fail-safe in the event of like catastrophic disasters like we saw with the snowstorm. Snowstorms aren't anything new to Fort Worth, and our leaders will tell you that we were surprised and caught off guard. And I think that what we've seen in Fort Worth is a culture of reactionary leadership. And what we do in a lot of my work, my 9 to 5, is talk about how do we govern with vision? How do we lead forward in visionary governance? And so what I would argue is there was plenty of places where we had an opportunity to think forward and not chase issues and challenges after another. I think that's important to do, but there's also space to have leadership that's willing to ask the tough questions and willing to like champion policy, even if I may not get, 9 votes. Right. And so I think some of the solutions we see, right, is what would it look like for us to have comprehensive systems for de-icing our roads? Not the state highways, the roads that connect neighborhoods to grocery stores. I'll give you one example. One of my neighbors, she's well over 70 years old, Eileen, and she couldn't get out of her house. She couldn't get out of her driveway. And we all like had to go to grocery stores, right? We ran out of food. No one was preparing quite that level. And we saw like neighbors rallying around to try to get out of our neighborhood as best as we could to help Eileen out. And the reality is we were underprepared. We did not have proper de-icing, and we saw the unfortunate and devastating reality of doing that when we look at the I-35 accident. And our leaders may tell you that that was somebody else's responsibility, but the reality is it's time out for like kicking the can and passing the buck. There was plenty of things that the city could do to help our neighbors get from their homes to their jobs. And then the other thing I would say is imagine if we had a transit system that was really resilient to snowstorms. And so there's so many issues where we completely fail to think forward. I look back to the Super Bowl that we wish it would have been in the DFW area. And that should have been all the evidence we needed to really make a bold investment as the 13th largest city in Fort Worth. So,
yeah, what is your you mentioned, being the number one city, which I love that boldness. And like, that's like the things we talk about here on the pod. What do you think has to happen in order for this to become not just the 13th largest city, but a city that people actually know across the country, right? In Google search, Fort Lauderdale is more searched than Fort Worth. So it's how do we become more of a national name?
I think the council has a great responsibility in that. And I think that when we think about what does the world see when they see Fort Worth, when they look at the council, they don't see many communities represented on the council. And so I think that we have to have global minded leaders. Me as a millennial, I've been trained in school, right? 21st century skills. We've been trained to think global minded. And so we have to have leaders on our council who are able to really connect Fort Worth to the country, to the world, and really be able to showcase the very best that Fort Worth has to offer. When I think about what that looks like for council members doing that, when we do that, then we start seeing we're able to attract all kinds of opportunities to the city. I think one of the challenges that we see in attracting, for example, large corporations that diversify our tax base. What do corporations see in their council? And when we think about like global corporations, they're wanting to bring their employees to our city center or to our city. And they're bringing 10 to 20,000 plus employees. And they want to be able to see in the council a diversity of perspective, of culture, that really resonates and reflects what their organizational values, their corporate values are. And so I think it really starts with the city council in terms of one, showcasing the city. But I think the other thing is when we talk about what is when we look at all of the TV shows and movies of all the cities like New York and Miami and Chicago. I kind of get upset because I'm like, why don't we have movies in Fort Worth, right? Like jokingly, I'm always thinking of that. And one of the things that I ask myself is, what is it that attracts cities to be global cities? It's things like having strong jobs, having a strong small business space, having, cultural spaces for families to learn and thrive. It's about having transit that connects us not only within our council districts, but throughout our city and throughout the North Texas metropolitan area. I think it takes that kind of vision in order to really start moving our city forward and putting our city on the map is how we say it in District 6. So.
Yeah, and I hear you talking about the diversity of the council, the lack of diversity, right, of the council in terms of the kinds of perspectives that we're getting. Yeah. In that same, because that is something that we are not leveraging in the city. It's a fairly diverse city, right?
Yeah.
So my follow up to that is, what other, we're not leveraging our diversity. What aren't we leveraging as a city? What do we have that's right there that was just like, man, if you could just put that in the public eye, we could start to do some of the things that you're talking about and be a better player on a global scale. What are some of the underutilized things here in Fort Worth?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that I see is just I see so many amazing people right here in District 6 who are doing amazing things for our community that may not necessarily get the spotlight. I think of Crowley ISD and all of the, they do this thing every year where they invite all the men in the district to come and, welcome kids to school on a red carpet and giving them high fives. And imagine what that does for just the culture around the school, a bunch of neighbors coming to the community and encouraging kids and pouring into them. I think I bring that up because, when there's this rhetoric out there around just how the crime rates are going up here in Southwest Fort Worth, for an example. And when you look at the crime statistics, we see that it's kids 16 to 26-year-old committing, like, just making bad decisions. When we talk about some of the crime types, we're seeing like vandalism, theft, one of my neighbors, his truck got stolen at the academy right off Bryant Irvin. And the reason I bring that up is because I think that the community has so many amazing programs and initiatives that have been underinvested in, that if they had the resources could really help guide and coach some of our young neighbors into really pursuing their dreams. Another instance is we see kids speed racing here. Joy riding is what we used to call it, but I guess it's upgraded to speed racing. And I'll tell you, I've lived in the district for a while, and speed racing was an issue when I was in middle school. And so, I mean, that's probably, 15 years ago, right? And when we think about that, what would it look like if we had partnerships with our first responders and with our nonprofits and with our community centers, to where we're hosting things like what I had in high school, events like where the principals would get a staged car accident and talk about just what type of devastation happens when we don't make great decisions as young adults or, soon to be young adults. I think that I bring those issues up to say that, like, I believe that there's so many neighbors here that are doing amazing work to really uplift the culture and just the community itself here in Southwest Fort Worth. And I think that my role as a future city council member is really connecting and being willing to roll up my sleeves and you go deep in the heart of neighborhoods and learn from neighbors what works, and then find the resources to, leverage those efforts. And so I think if we replicate that all across the city, right, where we're not leaving neighborhoods behind, we then see, communities that are able to showcase their culture. Or imagine if we had like cultural arts districts in every neighborhood and not just in West 7th. I love West 7th area and I love the museums, but imagine if neighbors were able to showcase their culture through public arts, through public spaces. I know a lot of my neighbors have dog parks. I mean, I have dogs, but we don't have dog parks, right? So I think that it's really nuanced, but I think that at the heart of it, it's we as leaders, we have to be willing to roll up our sleeves and build and highlight and amplify the culture in our communities, and that takes like doing the footwork.
Yeah. Something, when I reached out to you and your team to do an interview with the 817 podcast, the thing that really impressed me was the branding, the website. I was like, this guy's running for city council or for mayor, because this is really looking smooth and you're doing a great job. And I think that just shows the power of young people taking leadership. I think another one was Sardui. She also had a great website and did great. Yeah. And I was like, wow. What is your strategy? How are you mobilizing, and how's that going? Just the overall strategy and the team and getting the name out there, because we're definitely rooting for you and would love to know ways we could help and support, and just, what's your strategy?
Yeah, I a year ago, well, not a year. Well, yeah, actually it was a year ago. My wife and I and my father, we had a long conversation, and I found myself like really critical of like the politics that I was seeing. I saw a lot of blame game. I saw a lot of passing the buck at the beginning of COVID. Meanwhile, no one was really taking leadership, ensuring that folks had masks, businesses had the masks to stay open, especially our essential businesses, et cetera. And I found myself in a critical place. And I remember I'm a person of faith. And I remember God saying, in response to my question, if not them, who? He was like, I called you. And so from that moment on, I did a lot of reflection and a lot of like inward looking to really like ask myself, like, is this the space to serve in city council? And my family and I, through prayer, made that decision. So I say that first to say that, like, for those aspiring to like run campaigns or run for office, it's not about showing up on the last day. On the last day to file your name on the ballot, which is, in February, and saying, I want to run 2 months around the corner. Right after that decision, we launched our campaign intentionally on July 21st of 2020. That would have been my mom's 63rd birthday. And we dedicated the campaign in honor of her memory and in honor for her 2-time victory over breast cancer. And the reason I say that is I have this deep value around, games aren't won on game day. They're won in the off season. And that was something that my parents really stressed me when I would get mad about losing games growing up. I really hated to lose. And my dad would always say, son, we lost today because we could have done a little bit more in the off season. And so we started 6 months ago. I have a team well over 15 people with over 35 years of experience. We have very low overhead. We're not paying consultants. So that means that I, as a candidate, am working really hard side by side with my teammates to run campaigns. And that's not what you see in city council races. You see people writing large checks, collecting large checks, and then writing large checks to consultants. And it's not to knock consultants. It's just to say that I really wanted to create a people-powered movement. And I had just an amazing support system around me to do that. And so over the past 6 months, I'm proud to say that we have over 300 small donors that have helped us raise over $30,000, which I would argue probably hasn't been done in Fort Worth off of a small donor base, but mostly off of big political action committee funds. And so that is just an example of like just how competitive we've been. And how compelling our message and story has been in the neighborhoods that, I grew up in. I think that as we look in our work last fall, my team organized around the November election, not to say vote for somebody, but to say vote. And I think that when we look around city elections, we see that turnouts between 3 and 5%. 3 to 5%. We talk about city council district that has 100,000 residents, and only 3 to 5,000 of those neighbors, our neighbors, are making a decision about who represents us and who has 1/9 of a vote over a significant city budget that translates into city services or the lack thereof in our neighborhoods. And so we're encouraging folks to vote, and we really built a lot of momentum in November and a lot of relationships that carried us over into January. So folks thought we were crazy for doing that, but I think that they're starting to see now what we were doing. And so we may have to change up the strategy a little bit on some ways. But I will say that, I'm really proud of my team in this election cycle. We've been blessed and fortunate to have powerful conversations with thousands of voters across the district because of our people power supporter base. And I'm really proud to see, what happens on 19th and May 1st.
Yeah, we are too. Yeah, I guess, one, we appreciate for the time in the interview. And we're really excited. I don't know what your take is as a local guy in the district, but really excited just to connect with you. And even just as young leaders, millennials as well, trying to make Fort Worth a difference. Hopefully this isn't the last time we get to connect.
No, I hope not. And I'm sure it won't be.
That's right. No, Dr. Williams, man, it's been good catching up. It's good talking with you. Love a lot of what you're saying. Love what you're doing. Best of luck to you in the election. Is there anything that you want to let the folks on the 817 podcast, is there anything you want to share about how to support, where they can go?
Yeah, absolutely. We are building a lot of momentum, and yet there's still room for folks to engage and support. Our website is drjaredwilliams.com. That's drjaredwilliams.com. It has all of our information about our campaign and how to get engaged. $10 makes a huge difference in our campaign. And so no donation is too small. No donation is too large. Give what your heart compels if you can. If not, we have tons of other opportunities that don't require financial contribution or investment. Like volunteering, like sending up a prayer, sending up positive vibes. If you want a yard sign, you can sign up for a yard sign by emailing us. And then just let's continue to vote, whether it's for me or whether it's for someone else. I would hope it's for me, but let's create a culture of voting around local elections. I think 5% is not okay. And my goal is to ensure that I leverage every bit of dollar resources that I have to help folks make a plan to vote so that we're seeing thousands at the polls on April 19th and all the way through May 1st. So look forward to talking to anyone and everyone. Reach out to our campaign and let's build strong neighborhoods together.
Well, that was Dr. Jared Williams. Man, I really like that guy. I mean, 31, doctor, well-spoken, his brand is remarkable. Like he's just, a real deal.
I admire anybody who can just rapid fire answers to tough questions like that, because it says to me, you're confident in what you're saying. You know what you're talking about. You're ready to talk about it. He's great. And throughout the interview, there were a couple of points that he kept coming back to that I really, really like and trust about him as a person, as a man running for a public office. And there are two things. One, he kept on harping on preparation, not only personal preparation, right, from like the sports mentality, but from being ahead of the curve, planning ahead, not being taken off guard. That is such a valuable trait that I value in my own life that I'd love to see in a city leader. He talked about the culture of reactionary leadership in Fort Worth. Yeah. You don't have to be reactionary if you're prepared all the time, right? Yeah. And then the other value that he talked about is like this idea of accountability. I think Dr. Williams, he strikes me in a short interview as someone who is going to hold himself accountable more so than I think even some of the people around him. I think he's tough on himself. I think he's going to push himself. That's why he is where he is today. And I think that quality of seeking accountability is going to serve not just him well as a city council representative, it is going to serve District 6 very well. So really excited to talk to him. Wish we would have more time, had more questions, but man, what a great guy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was a big, I mean, what I love is just his composure. I mean, he's just that calmness about him. Like I think he was, very calm, and I think that's what you need in a local politician who's going to hear a lot of different views. You're going to have enemies, and you got to show up still and smile. And I think like that energy was really awesome to kind of see and connect with him, that you can even just feel on a Zoom call. And I sure hopes he wins. I mean, just a value add. I almost would, say hopefully he is really considering to continue to grow in leadership in Fort Worth and really have some mayoral aspirations, and maybe even state aspirations. I don't know, because, he's a bright spot in Fort Worth leadership.
Right. Well, and Maddie Parker, he talked about this as well, but Maddie Parker mentioned it last week in the interview, that focus on making Fort Worth a global player. I like that like-mindedness. I like that streamlined vision. And it's really about getting our heads up out of the sand and out of Fort Worth and out of Dallas and even out of Texas and looking around and saying, are we going to be a player on a global market?
Yeah.
And if so, how are we going to do it? And utilizing the things that he talked about were important. And of course, he's got educator brain. I clue in on educator brain. So much of the things that he says we're not spotlighting and we're not doing enough for seems to be really rooted in young people in our community. I love that. Let's invest in the youth. Let's make sure that youth wants to stay here in Fort Worth, and they're going to help us elevate the city. Let's keep that talent right here. That's how we become a better global player.
Love it. All right, so let's get into our wins and losses. Man, I actually have a weird win, but I love it. My win is keeping it with local elections. Is a lot more is coming out. Shout out to the GOAT, Bud Kennedy, for really now. I like when people put a little sizzle to the fire, showing us what we have to really decide on when we look at elections. And so my win is Steve Pinate. And you're probably wondering, like, why is Steve Pinate our win? Well, if you don't know who Steve Pinate is, he has a whole story in the Sunday's paper and Star Telegram, but he's a real estate guy, and as well as a pastor and super radical kind of evangelical dude who's like anti-gay, like anti-immigration. And I mean, he is just fired up and just one of those guys who I think why he's a win is because Dr. Brian Byrd can't get all the crazies now. So that means the crazies have to decide between Dr. Brian Byrd and Steve Pinate. So the fact that Steve is here, I feel the idea of Dr. Byrd winning or getting a lot of votes to make it to the runoff, it hurts his chances because Steve is going to be loud and vocal and maybe take away some of those people from Dr. Byrd. And so for that's a win. But besides that, this guy's not he's not anything I would ever want to be or see in Fort Worth, Texas.
You know, I've kept my mouth shut about who I would and wouldn't be voting for a while. I will say with confidence, I will not be voting for Steve Pinate, who, you know, says in his article that he is banking on his Trump supporters to go ahead and go vote for him. So, yeah, dog, I'm out.
Yeah, I mean, and I know the other part, like in one of the stories that we saw was you got Steve, who's like outward loud, you know, Trump life, but Dr. Bird, you know, $2,800 to the Trump campaign in 2019. That, you know, now you're also seeing like the difference between Pinate and Bird is Pinate's trying to fight for some votes. Bird is trying to strategically play to win. Right. So the play to win is I need to have those views enough to get those people to vote, but to win the whole thing in Fort Worth, I can't be too crazy. Yeah. So like what's perfect about this is like Dr. Bird can't come out and act like Steve, because then he's better than that in the sense of he's a more institutional politician. Right. Where Steve is a bulldog, he's fighting for noise, he's fighting for tickets. Yeah. And so I'm just loving that. I want him to scream how loud as he can on every TV show, on every newspaper. Like, let him go, because then it just means that it detracts from Dr. Bird. So I wonder what's going to happen. I mean, I know Dr. Bird has all the money. If he's going to, you know, the best investment he could do is buy out Pinate. That would be like, yo, how much money do you need to just stop? Because he's going to take some of his fire. You know,
he could. But, you know, and to your point, man, you talk about it every podcast, talk about it every episode. We need people to vote. We need people to vote. We need people to vote, because I think a lot of candidates are just kind of throwing the hat in the ring because they're like, yo, I need how many votes to win this thing? Yeah. And it's not an absurd number. Which is why, and you know, and I believe his name is Professor Riddlesberger from TCU, a political scientist. He said something to the effect of like, "Hey, this man could use his network to make a dent and make an impact." But to your point, what I compare him to is like kind of like a car alarm. You know, like you guys know those things on your cars that like beep if somebody like. You know, nobody ever uses it, right? To actually, it's not theft prevention anymore. It's just more of like a noise that happens. And I just keep thinking like, I was like, he's noisy. He's like a car alarm. People are going to turn around and look at it, but no one's actually going to do anything about it. Like my neighbors don't pick up the phone and be like, 911, someone's trying to steal my neighbor's car. It's nothing like that. It's just making noise. People look at it, but they don't actually do anything about it. So I hope that's the case here. Boy, I hope I'm not wrong.
Yeah. And, we'll see, but I think what's really cool, and here's the thing, like, I know I'm someone on this pod that says the word evangelical a lot when describing Dr. Bird, and my whole thing here, guys, is just like, there's a difference for being Christian and having religious views, but then there's a difference from being like the evangelical. I look at evangelical right like the way maybe some people would say the radical left. Like, that's the way I'm using this word, and both Dr. Bird and Pinate are evangelical rights that do wrong to, I believe, the Christian faith and the community for the good that happens from it in the majority of Christian families and communities that, you know, represent our country. But what's happening is now they're creating this polarization by not being able to adapt or see. And I'm sorry, I'm just against people who are anti-gay, anti-choice, and are going to not be able to update their data set of where the world is going and what a modern future looks like. Republicans, conservatives, don't be blockbusters, BGM, stop being taxis, learn that the world is changing and you just need to modernize. And there's a lot of people who believe in the things you believe in from a fiscal perspective. But when we tie up to this craziness, because, you know, evangelicals, 87% vote Republican. And they're huge. They comprised 24% of the state's voters in 2018. That means a good third of Fort Worthians probably hate our podcasts. But I just want you to realize, like, that's what I'm just trying to say here. There's enough other great candidates that we've already highlighted to select from. So what's your win?
Yo, totally taking it off the rails here, but my win is actually La Gran Plaza getting a Fort Worth library location. They're calling it a retail library. I love the idea of putting information, putting knowledge, and putting access to those things where the people are. And the article did a really good job of saying like, hey, this is where the people are. It's a de facto community center. Why not make it a library as well? I know that, you know, when I was a little kid, I loved going to the library, and so much of my love for it was because I had close access to it. So it was easy to be like, hey, it's just right there. I'm just going to go pop in. If you do that with a community asset like a library, and you put it so close to something where the community is already going, I see that as a giant win. So go Fort Worth Library. Excited to see that happening. I think it's going to be a beautiful thing.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I think that's a great idea. And I mean, a lot of anything is, what is the market doing and how do we respond to it? And I know that's very businessy, but those languages make sense in government access services and like the way we spend our tax dollars on things like this. Like,
yeah,
product market fit, people.
Absolutely. And library, like anything else, right? They can't be taxis looking at Ubers. They gotta adapt, and they are adapting. And I love the adaptation. I think it's meet people where they are, call it a retail library, make it kind of cute. Give it a coffee shop, give it a little bakery, do whatever you got to do to get people there. Because in my opinion, they are just so vitally important. Giving people access to internet, computers, magazines, newspapers from around the world, books that otherwise they wouldn't have access to. Just being able to go through and browse titles, you know, as a kid or even as an adult, it's absolutely vital. They have to change or die. I'm glad to see that they're changing.
Yeah. So we're going to go into losses. We usually want to do the losses first, but hey, you know, Dr. Jared Williams made this a positive podcast, because how can you not love that guy?
For sure.
So my loss is kind of this migration, the migrant increase, influx in Texas, and how we're kind of handling it as a state. A couple podcasts ago, we brought this up about how this was 6-page news, but we really need to have a conversation on how we handle immigration in our state and migrants coming from the south border, but then as well as the refugees. And so honestly, it's a loss for me. It's because the problem with politics, and, you know, everyone's trying to bite the mic to make this Biden's problem for being too nice. Everyone's trying to say this is a Trump problem for not caring enough, and like having just not making a good proper transition for people. But what if there's some great data out there? If you search data on the latest spike in migrants at U.S. and Mexico border compared to past years, a lot of this isn't that crazy. Like if you literally look at it, there is 4 months in 2019 that are greater than the spikes today. And what's crazy about it is like, this is just typical spikes that are happening. And ultimately the increase comes down to, there's no proof or evidence that it's because of Biden or Trump, but there is evidence that like this is seasonal. You actually saw in 2019 that during the Trump administration, total apprehensions increased by 31% during the same period. Currently, we're at 28% of migrants apprehend. I just would love this graph. I'm going to put it in the description so you could see the graph, but it just really shows you how like a lot of this increase just comes from, like, when you look at the graph, 2020 is so low because of COVID, because of the inability to take that leap and walk through countries. That's why. So now you're just getting the backlash of COVID, right? Like it's the same way you're seeing spikes in flights. This is where you're seeing spikes in Airbnb bookings, the spikes in restaurants. You're seeing the spikes in people coming to America because of now the passing of COVID and things like that. So I just think, like, I wish this was more a data story and we talked about solutions rather than everyone trying to point a finger and blame somebody, rather than just understanding these are just market demands of, fortunate for us, we live in a great country.
I really have nothing to add because you so beautifully and eloquently put a bow on that. I'm with you. This is a problem that it's not a problem. It's something that we should be inviting as a solution. Like, we need to find solutions to help these people and see it, like, to your point, of as an asset. People want to be here. Let's make that meaningful for us. How do we turn that into, I mean, imagine from a business perspective, imagine people standing outside of your business with wads of money and potential in their hands and just being like, I want to give this to you. And businesses being like, nah, fam, like, hold on. We can't take all of that right now. I feel like this is like that, except put the business aside. These are people. This is a human issue, man.
Yeah, this is a humanitarian problem, 100%. And I look at it like this, right? I'm going to go off my little analogy tangents, but if you look at here, it's like a great example is like everyone will say I'm not against immigration if they just do it the right way. But like what's happened is you're not seeing the scalability, right? You're going back to the coffee shop. I'm only making coffee this fast, but there's a line out the door. Mm-hmm. And so you're having a scalability issue. And what happens when there's a scalability issue? Humans don't tend to do the right thing. What they tend to do is the same thing that people who want immigrants to go through the process the right way is the same people with their Chevy trucks and their Ford trucks. When traffic gets clogged up, what do? They don't wait in line. They hop out into the grass. They drive by everybody and they go out and they go off the rules, because supply and demand of where we want to go as humans is higher than the rules that are in place. And so when you go off of the road because you can't sit in traffic, you're no different. And that's what I believe. This is a humanitarian problem, but it's also an opportunity. Now, I'm very pro as many people come to America as possible. The reason why I'm pro people coming to America is because, one, I believe we're a globalized world, but two, the biggest threat to Americans is India and China, who has 3 times the size of people as we do. And so we have a people problem in the sense of how do we have an asset? And also, like, this is a legit, like, people are running away from the craziest stuff ever. Like me and you and people who have acai bowls and matcha boba drinks, we don't comprehend. And so it's just like, what is it worth to care about people? And luckily, it's only Mexico and the Honduras and the cities below us that can come to America. But there's countries all across the world who don't even have access to an America. And so it's just like, we got to figure out how to turn this into a positive rather than a negative.
The loss for me is it ran in this Sunday's paper, and it had to do with trying to find, I guess, lost students in Fort Worth. So the title of the article is "The Schools Try to Find No-Show Students Amid the Pandemic." It's really heartbreaking to know that among all of the things that COVID did is it really hurt some of our youngest, most vulnerable population in their educational outcomes going down the line. But also, Silas, who wrote this article, Silas Allen for the Star-Telegram, beautiful, comprehensive article that really tackles this from all sides and all facets. We look at it from the student side where, students are seeing a higher failure rate. A lot of students aren't even reporting to campus, right? A theater teacher from McClung Middle School said that this year he's got about 20 kids on his roster that he's never even seen before. That's detrimental. That's awful to think. I hope that those kids are with their families, they're being loved, they're being taken care of, and they are exploring a world outside of school and they're learning a lot. But my heart of hearts knows I don't think that that's actually the case. And I'm really nervous about what's going to happen to those kids down the line. But he took it, there's the student perspective. But then families really trying to overcome a lot of these barriers about like, hey, we don't have broadband. We don't have information. We don't even know what we're supposed to do. And then how disheartening is that as a parent if you can't actually help your student get the things that they want? Because as a former teacher and as someone who works in schools, I will tell you, kids want to learn. We are designed to want to learn. That's why people are listening to this podcast. You're not listening to this podcast because the sound of my voice is just like music to your ears. It's because you're here to learn. Yeah. You're interested in what people have to say. So I feel tough for the families, teachers kind of going it to that level. How disheartening do you think it is for teachers to know that the failure rate is up 57% over the same period of last school year? How do you think that makes, individuals who are working to the bone to do a job? How do they feel about that? What does that do for the longevity of our teachers in a classroom? And then finally getting into the school perspective, kind of zooming further and further out. I look at that school perspective and it makes me sad that one of the paragraphs leads with, teachers have attributed the uptick of the district's failure rate to the shift to online learning. If we're attributing that failure to online learning now, does it hinder schools from trying to be innovative in the future? Do we say, well, remember we did it during COVID and it was terrible and our failure rates were sky high and parents weren't getting the information? Shut it down, go back to quote unquote normal, put people in the building, and let's call it a day. I really hope that school leaders and school officials aren't thinking that. I have indications from other districts around the country that say that that's not what we're thinking. But stories like this make it hard to not want to just say, hey, we're put them back in the building, because worst case, we could look like we did last year. So really comprehensive article.
Yeah, I'm looking at what you have here. It says Fort Worth school saw a spike in the number of students who had one or more Fs. It says during the first grading period, the number of middle and high school students failing in class was up 57% at the same period last school year.
Yep.
Yeah, the second grading period was 30% over last year, the number of students failing in class. That's, and I guess how do you see, what, like, I know people are like allowing kids to make up class grades, I guess, but like,
yeah. And, I won't get into weeds with any sort of like grading policy or anything like that, because obviously I think, you can paint a picture. Data paints a picture. It doesn't paint the whole picture.
For sure.
And I think that this is important to look at, and that data is valuable. But I also think it's important to remember that a lot of learning happens outside of what a student earns on a grade, right? Like, I think any of us who have graduated from school, anybody who went to school, forget that, graduating from anything. Like, if you went to school, that the grade on a report card or the grade in your college transcript does not dictate the amount of information that you actually learned. I know plenty of 4.0s who don't know anything, and I know plenty of 2.5s who are the smartest people I've ever had a conversation with. So again, it's a part of the story. It's not all of the story, but I know that failing a class, I know the effect that it had on me when I failed my very first class as a student. I know the effects that it can have on teachers. I had students who failed, and I was like, man, I'm just not moving the needle for them. And I know the effects that it has on families. So like, this is a problem. This is an issue, and it is a loss in terms of like the scope of this problem. But man, major shout out to everybody in this article who was cited as caring, knocking on doors, and trying to solve the issue and say, hey, we want him back in school. What can we do to help you? Let's meet you where you are. Kind of goes back to my win with the La Grande Plaza Library as well. If we meet people where they are, we help them be more successful. Yeah. Don't make everybody come to us. And I think schools are going to innovate in that direction of like, did you see how much more involved we were with the community when we went to them? Don't lose that. Make sure we keep it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, all makes sense. And I think it's that what we do over the summer. I'm glad we're seeing the vaccines coming out. We're looking to also think about really opening up. So hopefully that we can even provide some summer opportunities for kids, and families can think about getting out of their house and doing something unique for their family. So great episode. We packed in a lot with just the updates. We're going to have more coming up. Shout out to Dr. Jared Williams. Check out Dr. Jared Williams' website if you're part of District 6. Donate, support. He's truly the future. And so we'd love to have him. We're going to have other people coming up as well. As April hits in the corner, we're going to have there's a big I guess, I don't know if you call it a debate or a chat with all the mayoral candidates on April 14th by the Chamber of Commerce. So we're going to be keeping an eye on that. But it's just great to have you guys every week hearing us out, hearing our perspective on Fort Worth. We're in this together, figuring out the right way for the funk so that we can collectively grow.